wire is for the clicker of this. No, is it? Or that is for this. Where are we at? Here on the feet?
Okay.
Is he going to be walking around?
Oh, well, that's enough room to stretch that up, isn't it?
Yeah, he
Okay,
can pull it
no, I
up.
mean, can we move that? Can we move
Where do you
want to
go?
Pull it up so that people. Wait. I think
Is
you
it
gotta.
attached?
No, it's. Oh, okay. I'm scared of you, guys. I'm like.
See why I have bad back?
That's yeah, because he's not as detached. We'll just wheel it
You
back
know
for
what
back.
you're doing, because I was afraid you were going to detach that thing. You good?
Yeah. Well, yeah, to my little media and health education class, you know. Good afternoon and welcome to the plenary session, Women's Environmental Health in Louisiana. The panelists today are Dr. Miguel Elizabeth Eli and Dr. John McLachlan. Dr. Miguel Elizabeth Eli went to Ben Franklin High School and Brandeis University, trained at Tulane Medical School and Tulane University School of Public Health, is involved with the National Black Women's Health Project since 1991, is a member of the Board of Directors of the National Black Women's Health Project, Operation Mainstream, Women with a Vision Incorporated, involved in education and prevention, in AIDS education and prevention, was an instructor in the Great Expectations program, and is also a member of the Black Women in Medicine. She's a member of LEAN. She's a teacher in Sunday school and Bible study. She practices medicine as a physician for the Orleans Parish School Board at the New Orleans East Physical, Medical, and Rehabilitory Clinic, and at a private clinic known as the Doctor's Office. I'm honored to present Dr. Eli.
Good afternoon. My presentation concerns the emotional health of women that have been subjected to environmental toxins and other illnesses. The National Black Women's Health Project is a national and international organization involved in self-help, and health advocacy for African American women. It was founded in 1984 by Billy Avery and became a nonprofit organization at that point. It's organized around a core program, and the component which is most significant as it relates to women's health in this context are the self-help groups. The self-help groups for the National Black Women's Health Project consist of between 3 and 12 women. The meetings are very informal, and my friend June Marshall coined the phrase kitchen table talk. It's just ladies getting together, talking about what's going on with them. We have a check-in, which basically talks about what you've done today, and we have people talking about their particular issues as far as health is concerned, as far as their lives are concerned, as a part of issues that might concern the group. We serve lunch or brunch or whatever is the appropriate snack or meal to have. It's just a real nice home visit. We try to have them very professionally organized so that we can say we're going to meet at 7:30, we're going to end at 9:30, and we have to negotiate any extension of our meetings. This organization, the self-help groups in this organization, is not therapy. It is not for the purpose of you bringing any psychiatric or psychological diagnosis. Were you saying something? Oh, I thought you were saying something. Oh, okay. It's not for someone that has a need for a therapist. It is a place where you can be encouraged by the membership to seek professional counseling. But it is a place where you can come and just let your burdens down. Sit down and talk about what's going on with you. Sit down and talk about what you think you ought to do. It is an organization in which listening is more important than speaking. We sit in a circle. We have a facilitator who is not the therapist, but the person who's hosting the meeting. We decide randomly who speaks first, who speaks second. Everyone gets their time to speak, all within the context of the duration of the meeting for that evening. It is a peer support process. Each woman is responsible for her own healing. It is not a place where students that are interested in doing a practicum on black women can come and sit in the circle and take notes. We're not about that. It is an environment in which we want to establish trust between the members of the group. We even had the idea of having a walk as a meeting, because walking for wellness is another aspect of the Black Women's Health Project. We start our convention at 8 o'clock in the morning with a walk. I've been to a couple of conventions. The number of people that actually wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning to walk is not what I would call demonstrative of the enthusiasm we have for walking for wellness. But a chosen few get up and do it. But we have what we're going to have in 1996 in May is a Wilma Rudolph walk, sponsored by the Black Women's Health Project here in New Orleans. And you'll be hearing more about it as we organize it more and more. Other aspects of the project include our Vital Signs magazine, which is put out quarterly. It is a publication that familiarizes groups that have some interest in Black women's health and Black women's wellness with what the Black Women's Health Project is doing. We've had topics such as breast cancer, such as domestic violence, such as relationships between mothers and daughters, to be those of interest in our publication. We also have published a book which is called Body and Soul. It is called Body and Soul, the Black Women's Guide to Physical and Emotional Well-Being. And the Black Women's Health Project is dedicated to physical and emotional well-being of African American women. We are downstairs at a table with some information for anyone that would be more interested in learning more about the organization. We are accepting anyone that is interested in membership in the organization. We are going to have a massive self-help group introductory session on the 27th of August. And anyone that signs the register down on the second floor will receive a mailing letting them know the address of this session, the time of this session, and all of the details that they may need. Any other questions that you have about it, you may direct to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eli. Our second speaker for today's session is Dr. John McLachlan. Prior to coming to New Orleans, Dr. McLachlan worked for 22 years at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, the nation's largest environmental health research center. The last 6 years there, he was the scientific director of the institute. Since last January, Dr. McLachlan has been the director of the Tulane Xavier Center for Bioenvironmental Research here in New Orleans. The center has faculty from both universities. Dr. McLachlan has been a leading researcher on environmental estrogens for over 20 years. In fact, he organized the first meeting on estrogens in the environment in 1979. He has published over 150 articles and reports and serves on numerous committees and organizational boards, including the Environmental Health Foundation and the Children's Environmental Health Network. I am proud to present Dr. John McLachlan.
Thank you, Asha. It's always daunting to me to address a group of participants in a women's health meeting, which I've done often, because as a man I have a sense of responsibility often for the diseases and dysfunctions that afflict women. But what I'd like to do today is tell you a little bit about what Tulane and Xavier is doing, and tell you a little bit further about some of the research that goes on in the area of environmental estrogens. Those of you who were here this morning heard a great deal from Dr. Soto and Dr. Deborah Davis, and so I don't want to belabor what they said and what they talked to you about. What I will talk to you and tell you a little bit about is some of the things that I think we know about these classes of chemicals we call environmental estrogens, and how I think they may affect women's health generally, not just breast cancer, and some of the things we should be alerted to, and some of the things we might want to alert physicians to, which I think is going to be an important role for us, especially in this center. Let me tell you a tiny bit about what's going on now at Tulane and Xavier with regard to the environment and women's health. As Angel said, the Center for Bioenvironmental Research is a joint enterprise between Tulane University and Xavier University. It has faculty from both schools. It has faculty from the medical school, the School of Public Health, and arts and sciences, engineering in this center, as well as at Xavier Arts and Sciences and Pharmacy. So we have a great deal of skill and talent and can address problems in a variety of different ways. We're in the process now of a strategic planning exercise to highlight what things we can do well and what will be our emphasis, because as most of you know, funding for research generally is being cut, and environmental sciences in particular is being cut. So the approach we've taken is to focus on the things that we already have the capacity to do well, but also on those things that we consider the most important, both for our community here and for the state of Louisiana, and then thirdly, nationally. One of the areas that we've highlighted that we think we have the capacity to do well, and which we think is important, and is also the area that I brought here to the Tulane Center, is to study how chemicals in the environment can mimic different hormones in our body, not just estrogens, but they can function like male sex hormones. They can alter a variety of different processes, and I'll tell you in a minute why we think that's important. In addition to the work we're going to be doing in our center, we also have established a close working relationship with the new Tulane Cancer Center, which is just 2 years old, and just brought in their active director, Dr. Roy Weiner, who is an expert in cancers of the blood and is actually set up a bone marrow transplant center for Tulane Hospital. So this is already making an enormous contribution, we think, to the health of the community. And Dr. Weiner and I and our different faculty groups have gotten together on several occasions and have decided to highlight as one of the 3 main areas for research and clinical work in the Tulane Cancer Center, the area of environmental carcinogenesis and environmental cancer, with an eye towards prevention and community outreach and community involvement. So our environmental center and the Tulane Cancer Center will be working actively to attack the issue of environmental cancers and environmentally associated cancers. Finally, probably the most pertinent importance to mention is that as part of the Tulane Medical Center plan, which is going on right now, one of the top priorities in the planning process is to have a women's health center. And there will be a collaborative effort between the Tulane Cancer Center, the Tulane Xavier Center for Bioenvironmental Research, and the Women's Health Center to highlight those areas of environmental sciences and cancer that specifically impinge on women. The Women's Health Center, which is in the planning stages and has not been totally worked through all of the plans and all the approvals, but I think there's a 95% chance that this is going to work out this way, will include faculty and include participation not only from the medical school and the School of Public Health, but also from the Department of Psychology, from Newcomb College. So it will be a truly comprehensive women's health center. And in the initial planning documents, what I'm on the task force for that center, we've urged the administrators that would make the final decisions to include not just the issues that are so cogent to you today, breast cancer and other issues like that, but to look at issues of violence, to look at issues of urban development and if possible, this I think will be one of the more comprehensive, perhaps the only comprehensive women's health center in the United States, and I think buttressed and supported by the Center for Bioenvironmental Research and the Cancer Center, I think there's a high likelihood of success and change. And as this develops, I'd be happy to come back and report to your group and let you know the progress, and I would also enlist your support at the present time to help us with the community outreach efforts, as well as help guide us in which sorts of avenues of investigation and clinical research we should be investing our resources in. This is a really tricky time for all of us because, as I mentioned earlier, government funding, corporate gifts, all of the sorts of things that as research enterprises we're used to relying on are becoming tighter and tighter. I don't see that avenue ending in the near future, so we have to work together as community groups and as university faculty to really look at those things that have the most impact and will have the most chance of success. So that's going to be the avenue we pursue. But as I mentioned earlier, and as I promised, since I need to talk about the environment and women's health, I will just come back very briefly and touch upon one of the reasons we think these classes of chemicals, which you probably heard about so much this morning, implying that perhaps this is the only way the environment affects women's health. We think that by looking at chemicals in the environment, both natural chemicals in our diet, which some people think these phytoestrogens, these dietary estrogens, might actually have a beneficial effect because the risk for breast cancer in Japanese women is much lower than it is for American women, and some people have proposed that this may be a result of these plant estrogens. Japanese women actually have lower prevalence of menopausal symptoms, suggesting that perhaps these phytoestrogens could be involved in that. The National Cancer Institute has several studies that they're trying to fund to look into these dietary estrogens to see whether, in fact, they may have beneficial effects. I think it's important to urge everyone to adopt as much as possible a lifestyle rich in vegetables. That there's nothing that can be said that doesn't say this is the best course for life generally, until no matter what the science says. But the other kinds of chemicals that we worry about and you heard about so much are those synthetic agents that persist in our environment and sometimes persist in our bodies that may indeed have adverse health effects. As you heard, I'm sure this morning, we don't know for sure whether chemicals in the environment working like hormones or anti-hormones are indeed associated with breast cancer. There's still a lot of work that goes back and forth looking at this association, or whether they have other adverse health effects such as on sperm counts and other things which you heard about. But where I think this is especially compelling for women's health is if we look through all of those organs in our bodies that respond to estrogens. I can make a short list and usually have a slide for this, and I'll try to remember it as I get older. It's harder and harder to do. But if I tell you that the organs of your body and my body that respond to estrogen would include brain, bone, breast, cardiovascular system, uterus, skin. So almost every organ and cell in our body seems to have some response to estrogen. So estrogens are obviously very important to how we live and what we do. What I can also tell you is that if you think of diseases and dysfunctions that have been associated through epidemiological studies and other clinical and health studies with too much estrogen, or estrogen at the wrong time, or estrogen in the wrong form, these include disease of the breast, and we've talked so much about breast cancer at this meeting, but also things like lactational suppression, which is an estrogen-associated disorder, and sometimes women take exogenous estrogens like dihydrotestosterol to suppress lactation if they don't want to breastfeed. There are some evidences you've heard about environmental chemicals that might be associated with breast cancer. There's some that suggest that some environmental chemicals working like hormones might actually be involved with lactational suppression. In terms of other diseases and dysfunction of the uterus, for example, the uterus, it's well known and well established that estrogens are associated with uterine cancer. It's less well known that estrogens are also associated with two what are called benign uterine diseases, endometriosis and uterine fibroids. And the term benign is only used by pathologists who look at the slides, not by the women that have them. And it's estimated that somewhere around 20% of women between puberty and menopause have either uterine fibroids or endometriosis. And African American women, the percent of women with fibroids approaches 30%. These are very serious diseases with a lot of long-term ramifications. There's, I think, been very, very little research in this area. And I think that the premise that some chemicals in the environment may indeed have hormonal activity compels us to do the research to see whether, in fact, there is any association with these disorders and have some way to perhaps ameliorate or prevent these disorders. So I just wanted to give you some sense of the overall scope of other places that estrogens can be associated with women's health, some of the reasons why we've made this a high priority over the years and why we will continue here at the Medical Center and the Cancer Center and the Women's Health Center, and to give you some idea of some of the outcomes we think, we hope, we would be able to attain with enough research and enough time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. McLachlan. We have a speaker who would like to just take a few minutes of your time. His name is Willie, and he's from the CANT organization.
Good evening. First, giving honor to God, and we also like to thank Lean for inviting us. I'm here to speak a little on our problem. I'm from Homer, and it's two Homers, but I'm from Homer, H-O-M-E-R, Cleveland Parish. Our Senate, Bennett Johnson, brought in a supposed uranium plant. All right, when he first came in, Miss Judy Malone was the first in the community that they contacted. They went to her home. They killed her a rock and said, "This is uranium." Well, they know she didn't know the better, but you cannot hold uranium in your hand. They even demonstrated with a plate. And she said, "Well, I know nothing about this. Let's carry it to a meeting." All right, they had already been to town. They had already got to the organizations like the Minister Lounge, big organizations in town first, before anybody in the rural knows about it. Now, in the rural you have a Highway 9 and you have a Highway 2. 7 miles out of town, Highway 9, you have a road go in to Senator Park Road on Highway 2. It's a 2-mile road to cut through. This plant is supposed to be built in the middle of this road. They would have to cut this road out to build a plant. All right. We are represented by police jury. We had a lady police jury at that time. I will not tell you nothing that we cannot back up. They paid them all to say that they would close the road. All right, you have a bluegill pond on the right-hand side of the road, run directly into Lake Clayton. Beautiful lake. We swims in it. All right. They said it won't hurt the lake. We know better. They take people to Europe to visit plant. They pick people to go. Anyone know anything about uranium, you can't go. People they picked it, you either waited for a government job in town, or you know nothing. You get a chance to go. We had one man asked to go. Couldn't go. All right. After everybody went to raise the sand, Bennett Johnson was supposed to came to home one night to answer the question. He didn't show up. He sent a man take down all questions they asked, and we would get back to them. As of today, they haven't got back. New media come around, talk to the people in the community. Even when the TV come on, only the people that want the plant is on TV. them talk against the plan, you hear nothing. We have even put some materials in the post office. It didn't get where it's supposed to went, it didn't come back. All right? Back in 92, back when Governor Ron was governor, he flew into Homer one day. We got a petition to Martin. They held him out to the airport until our petition ran out. Then they brought him in town. All right? They had a halfway house coming in. Well, you know that the community of ours is across the track. You want to find African black, you got to go across the track. All right. They wanted this halfway house, but it was in the white neighborhood. They got together, they voted it out. We can't get a vote. All right, they came up with a wage dump in the white neighborhood. They signed a petition, got it out. Now they want to come up with a wage dump in the black neighborhood. They bring the same petition over, it won't work. But it did over this way. All right, they played a game with us like when we wanted to meet with them, they wouldn't meet. Just here the other month, we asked for a meeting with the police jury. We came up, the meeting was canceled because Nelson Pierpont mama passed. He's not even a police jury. Would the meeting been canceled if my mama had passed? All right, they're going to put the meeting next week. We go up next week. We go up next week for the police jury meeting. You know what they tell us? We had it last week. After they buried it, we went on with the meeting. We were left out again. Now, they won't have another meeting until next month. All right, one more thing. Well, I need two more. Senator Johnson came about this land. His lawyer Payne owned 600 acres of land in the middle of Center Springs before it broke. He bought 442 acres from his lawyer. I will give you the price of all the timber on the land plus $1,200 an acre. Look her land in the country, worth no more than $400. Benny Johnson gets $3 million from Europeans to locate this facility. That's why this plan is there. All right, one more thing. We do need y'all farm. We are in a large debt. And if any of y'all can let us have anything that we can have a tax number to where you can get a receipt and get it off your tax at the end of the year. So if any of y'all can help us, I'll be sitting over and I wish you would contact me. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bamboula 2000 is a unique music and dance experience that celebrates the cultural contributions of Congo Square here in New Orleans. Would you please put your hands together and welcome Bamboula 2000.
as Southern women and men in support of our rights to keep these. And a healthy way of doing it. We thank you. In Africa, the drum has a strong healing power, and the drum is called upon for all types of healing. So we appreciate your recognizing the importance of the drum in your celebration. The cowrie shells that the women wear are a source of power or used as a source of femininity. They've been used for divination. So in our African tradition, we invite you to celebrate with us as we do Jola, the dance of the Jola people, the dance of the Jola people. Now in Africa, there's no stage and no audience. So you all have already gotten into it by participating, so just keep it up and we'll come get a few of you. All right. They don't need them. We as Americans now have to learn that. So continue your efforts. Bamboula supports you. They all thanks and praise and creative.
We're going to do a rhythm now that's called lambans. Everybody say lamban. Lamban. It's from the Bambara people of West Africa. One of the purposes of this rhythm is that it is a dance and a rhythm of healing. So we're going to leave you with this one, lamban.
Our next speaker is Ms. Judy Brady, who is from the Center for Cancer Prevention Coalition.
Now, do you think it's fair being asked to follow that?
Okay.
You're awake.
That's true, you're awake. That's true. I mean, well, the blood is running. The blood is running. I was charged with talking to you about the business of cancer. And already I want to, oh, I forgot something. Wait a minute. I want to express a debt of gratitude to both Monica and Diane this morning, because they did a lot of my work for me, I think. And everything that I'm going to say really rests on the picture that they gave you. But before I start, I have to tell you, which is why I had to go get this book, why it is such a pleasure for me to be here in front of this particular audience. I was diagnosed with breast cancer 15 years ago. That led to a bilateral mastectomy and a year's worth of chemotherapy. Probably because of my own history of involvement in the women's liberation movement of the late 60s and early 70s, I began asking questions right off the bat about why I should have cancer And I started looking for the genesis of my cancer, not in myself, but in the world outside of me. And that's because the women's movement gave at least one gift to the progressive movement in this country, and that was the articulation of the connection between the personal and the political. And because I understood well that connection, I had a sense that what had happened to me didn't come from within me, but from somewhere out there. However, 15 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot around me to give me much support for that view. And what I got told to me by both friends as well as the medical profession essentially was that I had caused my cancer myself. It's one that we're all familiar with. At some point, not too long after my diagnosis, I stumbled. I really mean stumbled. I didn't know it was there. I stumbled on Samuel Epstein's book, classic book, The Politics of Cancer. For me, that was a lifesaver because Samuel Epstein gave me, in meticulously documented evidence, proof for what I felt had to be going on, that there was something in the environment that had something to do with why I, who belong to the overwhelming majority of women with no risk factors, should come down with this disease. Then, in 1986, I had to come here to New Orleans for my job, and I stumbled on another gem, and it's this book. I don't know whether any of you have seen it. It was published in 1984. It was written for and commissioned by the state legislature of Louisiana. It's a gem. It's a really great book. On the heels of finding Sam Epstein's book and then finding this, I had the courage to put together a book myself, but I don't think I would have had I not found this book here in New Orleans. So, it's a very special pleasure for me to find myself some 10 years later standing in New Orleans talking about the business of cancer. Nancy Evans in San Francisco, Breast Cancer Action, once quit. She's really good at these one-liners. That cancer is a growth industry. She's right. The business of cancer, or the cancer industry, has grown and prospered by tenaciously promoting a very specific approach to a mushrooming epidemic. There are basically only two ways to approach cancer. One way, the way that most major public health problems have been successfully dealt with in the past, is by primary prevention, stopping the source of the disease in the first place. Now that is not the approach of the cancer industry. They have taken the other road, find a cure. And they are sticking to it. One could almost admire them for it. Despite the fact that since the so-called war on cancer was declared in 1971, more than $1 trillion have been spent on cancer research and treatment. And every year, as you've all seen evidence of all day long, the cancer rates inexorably rise. The title of the book that I did, I think largely because I found this book, was called 1 in 3. That statistic, as you now all here know, refers to the risk rate for Americans, that 1 out of every 3 Americans will at some point in their lifetime be diagnosed with cancer. Unfortunately, as of 1995, that's now obsolete. According to the ACS and the NCI 1995 facts and figures, which make the title of my book obsolete too, now fully 49% of men, that's almost 1 out of 2, will be diagnosed with cancer, and 39% of women, that is more than 1 out of 3, will be diagnosed with cancer. In fact, the National Cancer Institute, in a report they published last year, predicted that by the year 2000, cancer will overtake heart disease and become the leading cause of death in this country, and those new statistics apparently prove them right. Yet still, they keep searching for that elusive cure. Why? Well, off the top, there's clearly a lot more money in searching for a cure In fact, there is probably more money in searching for a cure than in finding one. And certainly, nobody is giving out grant money to stop Dow Chemical, or to stop Monsanto, or to stop Chevron. Cancer researchers are all looking for the Nobel Prize. And no one is going to get a Nobel Prize for stopping this disease in the first place. Now, however, searching for the cure approach is being called into question. This conference is evidence that we are beginning to ask questions about the old approach. We're getting tired of decades of fundraising on the promise for the cure that's just around the corner, as we all see more and more members of our families die. Now, I used to think that most Americans believed what the American Cancer Society told them. I actually have on tape the American Cancer Society saying fully 2% of cancers are caused by environmental contamination. Mostly cancers are an unfortunate occurrence that happens to somebody who has a bad lifestyle or bad genes. But 2 years ago, after having the breast cancer stuff, I got a basal cell carcinoma on the side of my nose. And you know, it's a little thing, it doesn't take much to get rid of that. So I had to go to the doctor, have it taken out. And then I had to go back to work after this very minor surgery, but I had this big white bandage across my nose. And so fellow workers, of course, said, "What happened to your nose?" Well, now you would think that after what I dealt with and what I'd gone through, what I've been thinking about all these years, that would be a snap. I could handle that very easily. But I found to my surprise that I had real difficulty in telling co-workers that I just had a cancer removed. And I think that's probably because the scars left from dealing with the breast cancer were much deeper than I realized. I couldn't face what I feared would be the look of fear and repugnance on the face of somebody when I said it was cancer. So, I had a dilemma here because I'm also a cancer activist. And that means I am supposedly dedicated to dragging this disease out of the closet where everybody wants to hide it. So I couldn't exactly say, my cat scratched me or something like that. So I came up with what I thought was my way out of this dilemma, answering the question and leaving my political integrity intact. And I said, when workers said, "What happened to your nose?" I said, "Well, I had a little accident with the ozone layer." You know, and I thought that people would leave me alone when I said that. Instead, what happened was almost to a person, when I gave my what I thought was clever response, almost to a person I would get this look of puzzlement for a second, and then they would say, "Do you mean cancer?" And I was frankly floored. But I learned something from it. What I learned is this: we know. Despite what the American Cancer Society has told us, we know. And this conference and your presence is adequate testimony to the existence of now a cancer movement in this country. Social movements like the one that we're part of only happen when some social crisis or miscarriage of justice reaches a crisis point and no existing social institution is capable of handling it. That's clearly the case with cancer. It's why we had an abolitionist movement, it's why we had a gay rights movement, it's why we had a civil rights movement, it's why we had an anti-war movement, and it's why we now have a cancer movement. Social movements, however, that deal with specific health crises are relatively new. The one that we know the best, of course, is the AIDS movement. And I want to talk about that for a second because the cancer movement and the AIDS movement are often compared because they came right on the heels of each other. And there is some similarity between the cancer movement and the AIDS movement. Certainly the cancer movement owes an ideological debt, if you will, to those early activists in the AIDS movement because the AIDS movement put the question of health sickness, the right to health care, etc., clearly in the political arena, dragging it out of the privacy of people's homes, putting it where it belongs. And then we came in on the heels of that. But that's pretty much where the similarities between our two movements really end. And let me explain what I mean. When the AIDS virus first appeared, first struck in this country with no previous history, just boom, practically out of the blue, there it was. It struck a very specific segment of the population, gay men, when it first appeared. Now that sector of the population is different in any number of respects from any other segment of the population that you could single out. First off, they're men. That means that they generally had more access to money and the kind of power that money brings. Secondly, they were a very well educated population, generally. Most importantly, however, when the HIV virus began showing up in this country among gay men, it happened after the Stonewall Rebellion. And that means that the AIDS virus appeared in a population that was a politically seasoned one and a politically active one. That means that from the very get-go, the community that was affected by the AIDS virus had input into the whole infrastructure, if you will, that grew up around the advent of AIDS and the epidemic of AIDS. Now, I certainly don't mean to imply that the AIDS struggle is over. You know, anything but, and we all know that. But it is true that the AIDS activists had an opportunity to exert considerable influence over the AIDS bureaucracy. That's not true for us. We face a really different situation. In the first place, we who are affected with cancer are a much more diffuse group than that original group that was struck with the HIV virus. And in the second place, we have to operate in a really different political and historical setting. Cancer is not a new disease. I remember in junior high school biology learning about the existence of, or the evidence of cancers being in prehistoric humans. It's been around since we've been around. What's new is the epidemic growth of this disease, most of it since World War II. Now, over those past decades, a huge monolithic bureaucracy has grown up around cancer, a bureaucracy which we in the cancer movement call the cancer establishment. Now, that sounds like a sort of typical loose term, but it's not. I'm very specific. I mean something quite specific when I say cancer establishment. What I mean by that is a set of politically and financially interlocked and interdependent organizations and institutions. One element of this monolith, of course, are government agencies like the National Institutes for Health, National Cancer Institute, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, President's Cancer Advisory Panel, etc. Then there are, can you hear me? Do I keep fading out? No, okay. Then there are cancer research institutions, which have names familiar to most of us, and certainly those of us who've had to deal with the disease. Dana-Farber, Sloan Kettering, MD Anderson, Fred Hutchinson, places like that. Also major academic institutions, which have their own little mini cancer research parts. Their ties, the cancer research institutions' ties to government agencies are really obvious because a lot of the grant money comes from them. A third part of the cancer establishment is the fabulously wealthy pharmaceutical industry, which orchestrates, I'm sorry to say, and I'm sure we all know this, an enormous chunk of what goes on in healthcare in this country. Again, obviously, the pharmaceutical industry has an interest in pursuing the search for the cure, which I now think of as our modern day search for the Holy Grail, rather than prevention, because if we don't get sick, they don't not-for-profit. They are also, of course, a significant source of research funding. I work for a medical association, so I know. Now, I don't include the medical profession in the cancer establishment, because even though physicians often, at least appear, to think of themselves as omniscient, and I'm sure that most of us have had to deal at one time or another with the arrogance of some of their little tin gods. In fact, physicians, particularly oncologists, do what they're told to do. That is, they follow the protocol set for them by the government agencies and the cancer research institutions. There is, however, one other important member of the cancer establishment besides the government agencies, the cancer research institutions, and the pharmaceutical industry. And that's the private, so-called charity, the American Cancer Society. Now, the American Cancer Society is the wealthiest and largest organization of its kind in the world. It commands millions of volunteers, all of whom I'm sure mean well, and it holds more than $1 billion in cash reserves and real estate. Pretty good for charity. I sort of think of the ACS as the public mouthpiece of the cancer establishment, or certainly they are the media committee of the cancer establishment, because the view that we the American people get of cancer as it's put forth by any of the major media, television, magazines, newspapers, or what have you, is generally a view that is propagated by the ACS, which in its 50-year history has never supported any efforts to curtail environmental pollution, and it has in fact actively sabotaged such efforts by other groups, and I'll give you examples of what I mean in a minute. Put together, the cancer establishment has controlled every aspect of cancer in this country. What kind of research is done, who gets to do it, what sort of treatment protocols are developed, which are labeled as quackery, even how we think about the disease. So that is what we in the cancer movement are up against. And these folks, the cancer establishment, I think, even wield a pretty heavy hand in determining who gets cancer, and we've learned a lot about that today. But it's also largely because all these components have one other characteristic in common, and that is they are riddled with conflicts of interest, both within the institutions of the cancer establishment and with industry, which is responsible for the pollution that lies behind the soaring cancer rates in the first place. Now, in a market-driven economy, which we've talked about all day, the search for the cure approach, as opposed to a primary prevention approach, leads inevitably to conflicts of interest. And those organizations of the cancer movement, that's us folks, who have stayed dutifully within the cure camp, thus enjoying acceptance by the cancer establishment, also exhibit the same tendencies, conflicts of interest. And I will give you some examples of what I mean by that in a minute too. Conflicts of interest within the cancer establishment are too numerous to name. Books have been written about it, good books, by the way. But for instance, the chair of the National Cancer Advisory Panel until recently, I think he's dead now, which is good for all of us, is a guy named Armand Hammer, who was also the chair of Occidental Petroleum Company, the folks who brought us Love Canal. And then there is, for instance, the fact that a ranking member of Sloan Kettering's board, that's one of the major cancer research institutions, was the vice president of Standard Oil of New Jersey. Now that guy isn't going to point an accusing finger at the petroleum industry, is he? There are dozens of situations like this, where there are financially lucrative connections among those whose business it is to treat cancer and whose other businesses cause cancer. It would be easy to slip into a conspiracy theory here. It's really hard for me to refrain from that. But I think what I'm talking about here isn't conspiracy conspiracy. I wish it were, because that would be easy. You know, that would be easy. Instead, what we're talking about is business as usual in a market-driven economy. The bottom line here is profit. And it kind of, you know, it doesn't matter what your politics are here. Whether you think a profit motive is a good thing, or whether you think a profit motive is a bad thing, or whether you've just not thought about it. What I'm trying to say, the point I want to make, is that we have to recognize the fact that we are in a culture where the prime motivation, I'm not talking about personal level now, I'm talking about what drives a culture, is profit. And if we don't recognize that, we're going to make mistakes in how we decide what we need to do. In fact, in our culture, probably more than any other, there's no aspect of human experience I can think of that we have left out of the marketplace. We have to recognize it. We've known for decades, certainly since Rachel Carson's book was published more than 30 years ago, that the use of pesticides, for instance, contributes to cancer. We say that pesticides cause cancer. Now, that's not wrong. You know, we've got plenty of evidence today that that's not wrong. But I think that when we say pesticides cause cancer, we need to be really careful about thinking about cancer causation. To distinguish between a root cause and what I call an agent, that being a polluting industry, and a secondary cause, the pollutants produced by the agency, that is the polluting industry. And what I mean is this. We could conceivably win the Greenpeace campaign to ban the use of organochlorines. There's no question that would be good for us all, and I certainly support that campaign. It won't get rid of cancer. It will force some changes among cancer agents, the agricultural chemical industries, and it will get rid of one secondary cause of cancer. The root cause for the continually escalating epidemic of cancer in our country is the lack of environmental policy and a social policy of profit over human health. Now, as long as that root cause, no broad environmental policy that human health is more important than profit, as long as that root policy remains unchanged, doing away with one secondary cause, a specific carcinogen or class of carcinogens, is of limited usefulness because another secondary cause could be substituted. In the case of organochlorines, maybe organophosphates. Or let us say that we actually manage to change farming in this country and institute a system of sustainable agriculture. But the petroleum industry continues to pollute. We'll still have cancer. Or the growing electronics industry sows more and more cancers in its workers with carcinogenic solvents. Or the nuclear industry, as Dr. Sternglass pointed out well this afternoon, which, by the way, loves the emphasis on chemical pollution. They are loudly promoting the idea that nuclear energy is clean energy. The nuclear industry will continue its deadly contamination of our world with ionizing radiation, which I suspect is more heavily implicated in our cancer epidemic than most of us currently acknowledge. Those are all secondary causes whose existence depends on the root cause, a fundamental public orientation that people count less than profit. The cancer business has simply joined its corporate and industrial cousins in looking for a cure, because that search for a cure is guaranteed to leave profits undisturbed. Now I'm going to go where angels fear to tread. Because I think that once we're clear on the root cause of the cancer epidemic, the lack of an environmental policy to protect human health, then the conflicts of interest within the cancer establishment assume their rightful place. Business as usual. And in this context, the manufacturing for instance, of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, championed by the American Cancer Society, is quite consistent with industrial practice. Does everybody in this room know about Breast Cancer Awareness Month? Breast Cancer Awareness Month was the brainchild of the PR division of a company called Imperial Chemical Industries, a large British chemical giant. They invented Breast Cancer Awareness Month. They invented that damn little pink ribbon. They pay the bills for Breast Cancer Awareness Month for the publicity. And we do their bidding. Now, I know that people don't mean to do the bidding of Imperial Chemical Industries. But whether we like it or not, they are the inventors of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and they profit from it, and I'll tell you how. Those same people, Imperial Chemical Industries, had a pharmaceutical division called Zeneca, which is now a independent corporation they broke off from ICI. Now, Zeneca, particularly when it was part of ICI, meant that ICI got to rake in the bucks from cancer from both ends. As a major chemical corporation, it was definitely a major polluter. Like Arm & Hammer, however, it had one who had one foot in the President's Cancer Panel and the other foot in Occidental Petroleum. ICI got it coming and going. I'm sure most of you here know about the so-called cancer prevention trials at the NCI, the tamoxifen trials. The $68 million trial to see if tamoxifen, a drug which is used to treat metastasized, it's an estrogen blocker, a drug used to treat metastasized breast cancer. In the cancer prevention trials, the NCI is trying to determine whether or not tamoxifen will prevent primary breast cancer. Despite lack of any clinical evidence whatsoever that tamoxifen will prevent a primary tumor. And plenty of evidence that tamoxifen can increase dramatically chances for other cancers, specifically or principally uterine and liver cancer. One of the most sort of outrageous incidents I know of in the tamoxifen trials is a comment from a Dr. Pitot, British guy, who is one of the major architects of the tamoxifen trials. When it was pointed out to him that tamoxifen causes uterine cancer, he said, and I quote, "No big deal, they can always get hysterectomies." Now, in case you haven't already guessed, the company that is producing the tamoxifen for the NCI's $68 million, that's our money, by the way, $68 million trial, Zeneca, an offshoot from Imperial Chemical Industries, who invented Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So that's the National Cancer Institute. They're private. In the private sector, their cousin is the American Cancer Society, and they are simply outrageous. For instance, 2 years ago, public television aired a program on pesticides in children, because children, of course, being smaller and growing, so that their cells are of much more rapid division, suffer the effects of pesticides more drastically and more readily than adults. Before that show hit the airwaves, the pesticide industry got wind of it, and they went running to their PR agency, an agency called Porter Novelli, based in New York, to get Porter Novelli to develop a counter message to the television show that was going to be aired. Porter Novelli went to work, and in fact, if your memory is good enough, mine isn't, but I take this on faith, before the show of pesticides actually hit the airwaves, commercials began appearing on major commercial television stations about how safe the American food supply is. Now, Porter Novelli, who took up the challenge from the pesticide agency, industry, went to another client of theirs to get advice on the best way to develop a counter message to that was going to be promoted by the program of pesticides in children. Now, can you guess who their other client was? was the American Cancer Society. So there you have it, folks, plain and simple. The American Cancer Society in cahoots with the pesticide industry. In another case, when Greenpeace first released its fine and beautifully documented report on the connection between breast cancer and organochlorines in 1992, I think, 3 years ago, the Chlorine Chemistry Council, which is an industry trade organization, immediately put out a press release denying that chlorine was dangerous to health. They got a physician to speak for them who said really predictable things like not enough evidence, need more research. That, by the way, need more research? That is a favorite stalling technique of industry. And every time you hear anybody say, oh, but we need more research on that, your warning antenna should go up. Okay. Anyway, the physician who said we need more research on behalf of the Chlorine Chemistry Council was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Clark Heath, who is a vice president of the American Cancer Society. Now, in our own movement, organizations who have adopted the cancer establishment approach, that is, find a cure, have also, I'm afraid, adopted the same forked tongue. Now, I want you to understand that I know that people have good intentions, and I don't want to castigate people's individual character or their intentions, but organizationally, we've got to take a look at what in fact is going on. For instance, the Komen Foundation, based in Dallas, and organizers of the multi-bucks Race for the Cure, which they have all around the country every October in Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Thank you, Imperial Chemical Industries. They are underwritten in part by the Chlorine Chemistry Council. And the chemical manufacturers aren't stupid. They know well that having their name linked to the so-called fight against breast cancer is a smart move. And they know that struggling nonprofit groups aren't apt to bite the hand that feeds them. In another case, the National Alliance of Breast Cancer Organizations, called NABCO, which has representatives from grassroots organizations all across this country, holds an annual event called Celebrate Life, which last year was funded in part, and my pronunciation would be bad because I don't speak French, by a company called Rome Poulenc Rohr, a French pharmaceutical corporation which has a pesticide factory in West Virginia that is very much like the Union Carbide chemical plant that blew up in Bhopal, and which in fact some environmentalists predict will be the next Bhopal-like accident. In my own community, the Bay Area, which by the way, according to the World Health Organization, has the highest breast cancer rate in the world, not country, world. There's an organization that has a cancer walk every year. It's a group of small grassroots organizations like Breast Cancer Action, Women's Cancer Resource Center, Women of Color Resource Center, Latina Health Project. This year I think there were 12 of them. They get together and they put on a walk, which is like the sort of AIDS walks that happen all across the country, you know, where walkers get sponsors and then these grassroots organizations divvy up the take. In the Bay Area, we have a company, Chevron, we have a Chevron company that is in a city called Richmond, which is almost entirely an African-American city because, as you heard today, it is people of color who live near the polluting industry. Chevron annually emits something like 400,000 tons a year of crap in the air on the city of Richmond. The Cancer Walk this year accepted a $5,000 grant from Chevron. They didn't mean to. They didn't know. But what they did by doing that was telling people that Chevron is our friend. And it's not true. In fact, under the leadership from the cancer establishment and the look for the cure approach, everybody's getting in on this act. Avon Cosmetics told a Wall Street Journal reporter last year that identifying themselves with the fight against breast cancer had had a very positive impact on their sales. The biggest danger in all this is that the increasing public familiarity with cancer means that we are beginning to fatalistically expect it. My 2 daughters have no doubt they're going to get cancer. That's terrible. Breast cancer, in fact, has now become such a trendy issue that I am told that Danielle Steele, you know who she is? Danielle Steele's latest novel has a heroine with breast cancer. Right? That's how trendy this issue is getting, and that's scary. Because the collusion between the cancer establishment and industry only illustrates the inherent deficiencies, I think, of the search for the cure approach. And even perhaps the drawbacks of limiting our own investigations to the cancer of one organ, the breast. And if we fail to take into account the realities of the social political situation we are in, if we fail to keep our sights on what the root cause of this epidemic is, not just organofluorines, not just the petrochemical industry, not just the nuclear industry, but the absence of a broad environmental policy that makes human health more important than profit, a policy which has legislative teeth to it. If we don't take that into account, we, like the women in the cancer book, run the danger of finding ourselves and our struggle being irrelevant to the real problem. And whether we intend it or not, we can end up on the wrong side of the fence. And I know that nobody here wants to be there. Thanks. Are there any questions? You have a question?
Yeah, you said that all cancer research is funded by the cancer industry?
No, I didn't say that. I said that, you know, I mean, I can't even answer the question about where all cancer research is funded. Government agencies are a large source of research money to private institutions. That's what I said. And pharmaceutical industry is also a source of funding to private institutions who do most of the research.
Because I don't think Dr. Goffman's getting any of that money.
Oh, no, Dr. Goffman is, no, he's on our side of the fence, not theirs. Yes?
Tell us the name of the Louisiana book you were referring to.
Do you want to see that? This book is really wonderful. Do you all know about this? Published in 1984. It's called Environment and Health in Louisiana, the Cancer Problem. You know, published more than 10 years ago. It's a really good book. This isn't the book. This is my Xerox copy of it, because I got somebody to steal one from a local hospital, and I took it to a Xerox place and spent my per diem money getting it copied, and it's, you know, I think it's great. Okay? Thanks.
At this time, thank you, Ms. Brady. At this time, we have a few words from Mr. Patrick.
What's on the agenda? Great.
Good evening. I'd like to say hello to everybody. My name is Robert Patrick, and I come to you just to speak with you briefly. But before I get into just a matter about the cancer situation, I'd like to just tell you that I'm here, and I'm also a candidate running for the position of Lieutenant Governor of the state of Louisiana. And I'm from Lake Charles, Louisiana. As I've really enjoyed being here and listening to the topics involving cancer. But as an attorney, I've been practicing law for 14 years, and I can tell you that the issues involving cancer has been various issues that I have had to take depositions on doctors many times. And it seems to me that it's amazing that how the medical industry has taken cancer and used it for purely economic reasons. And I say that because, in hearing the lady speak earlier, if you know someone who had cancer, someone in your family who had cancer, you need only look forward, just look at the bill from the hospital, and you will see just the enormous bill that you would get from the hospital. It seems to be astronomical. It is so high that basically if you don't have insurance or some type of insurance, basically a person will die for the life of treatment. I feel that as a person who's running for political office, that you should be concerned about any person who wishes to be a political leader in your state, for them to show concern that they have a concern about the economics involving the matter of cancer. And it appears to me that we as a people, that you must place a political demand on the system to make them understand that we may have a cure to cancer, we may, but do we have the will to bring forth? Or just because of the greed and the economic prosperity, do we wish to continue to treat this disease and never really find a really cure? I think an organization like yourself is a very fine organization, because they say that the wheel that squeaks the loudest gets the grease. And I think that you as an organization should place demands on the system and make sure that your political leaders respond to you. And in their response, let them know that if they do not respond to you, then you will not support them. I just thought of a few questions that I think will summate my statement. And the question that, do we have the will to eliminate cancer in this country? The second one, are we willing to forego the enormous profits for treatment of cancer? Are we willing to forego the enormous profits? And I say that because, ironically, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said that, you know, let's take gasoline, that cars, we can make cars run off of water if we wanted to, but because we are economically tied to the great oil industry, the big companies will not allow us to move forward. Well, we're kind of like stuck with this cancer situation, because the medical industry seems that they have this love affair with the treatment of cancer, but they really don't want to find a cure to cancer. The third question is that, will the public rise up and demand that the medical association and big industry stop playing games with our health? And fourthly, are we willing to politically stand up and hold cancer as a top priority, and hold insurance coverage as a top priority in treatment of cancer? I can only tell you this, that if I'm elected as Lieutenant Governor, I have submitted my platform, and my platform deals with the issue involving big industries that's polluting our neighborhoods and polluting our state. And I feel that we should make industry be good neighbors. Good neighbors mean that we don't ask you to come here and give us good jobs, but yet give us a death warrant when you're here. I think as a leader, you should look for a person who understands, and a person who's willing to fight for not the industry, but to fight for people just like you. If you elect me as your next Lieutenant Governor, I will be a mouthpiece for you. I will stand up and I will allow you to present your position and your argument. And I feel that I can understand you. When I say you, I'm talking about the average citizens who have the great frustration that it appears as if that they feel that no one really listens to them when they go up against big industry. But I can tell you this, as an attorney in suing industries involving cancer and what caused cancer, you would be amazed at the type of experts that these industries are willing to bring forth to dispel any notion that a person received cancer as a result of being exposed to a certain type of chemical. It appears to me that the average person is really at a severe disadvantage in fighting these companies. I have subpoenaed experts in New Orleans and Baylor University, and it appears to me that they even decide, and they even tell us what causes cancer. They'll tell us that benzene causes cancer, ionizing agents cause cancer, but then they'll turn around and say, well, this chemical don't cause cancer, that chemical doesn't cause cancer. And then you ask the experts, where do you get this opinion from? What are you basing this opinion on? They really don't tell you, but they just tell you to accept what they say and move forward. I say this here, that we need to realize that knowledge is power, and we need to find more knowledge and inform the public more about this cancer, because as we begin to have knowledge and raise our conscious level, we will and we can find the cure to cancer. Thank you very much. May God bless you.
Okay, we're ready to do our wrap-up session. In fact, I encourage us, since this is a session where we're going to exchange information and talk about what we've talked about in the workshop, what we've shared together, and what we've learned, and what we want to see happen, I'd really appreciate it, even though I know it's late, if you'd move a bit closer. That this is something that we want to do together. We need your input of what you thought about what you heard, where are we going to go, and Rolinda Doris is going to lead us, one of our wonderful leaders here, Rolinda. Wilma Subra, who's also a wonderful leader, is going to help sort of bring this home, because one of the things we talked about when we planned for this conference is this is just one step towards where we want to go. This is one little action towards where we need, on our journey to where we want to go as women, okay? So if we'll move a little bit closer, and then Rolinda and Wilma are going to do the wrap-up, and you guys have been great. You're hanging on here through the drums, everything, we appreciate it. Rolinda? Yeah. Give a hand to yourself, as a matter of fact, for still being here. Thank you. Okay? Wilma? Rolinda? You ready? I don't know if anybody, Susan is into this.
Well, like Mary Lee said, when we were planning this, we didn't want to make it long. We didn't want to make it tiring, but as you know, when you get all this information, all this good information, people seem to go on. And really, it's for our benefit, because we can take this back in our communities and use it as a really useful tool. So what we want to do right now is talk about, what we've learned for today, what we're going to bring back. What tools did we actually come up with? What strategies did we come up with? And how are we going to use them? And I appreciate everybody for coming out and attending today and spending all your time here. And I don't have a list of the workshops that we did go into today, but if somebody from, okay, you have a list? And if somebody from each workshop could just kind of like stand where you are, just share what you all did there, talk about what you liked, what you didn't like, because that too is helpful for us in planning these types of events. And then we'll just come up with some overall strategies and see where we're going to go from here. Is there anybody from the Louisiana Industry and Breast Cancer who's responsible? The leader was Joan.
Just real quickly, what we did is we talked about how specifically in the state of Louisiana, the chlorine industry is really, really prevalent here, because the agriculture industry is here, the plastics industry is here, pulp and paper industry is here, and all these industries are really heavily dependent upon chlorine. So what we did is talked a little bit about the effects of chlorinated chemicals on human health, with a focus on breast cancer, but going beyond that too. We zeroed in on the pulp and paper industry and specifically talked about what kind of personal and political action that we can take with our consumer buying power, and also with a focus on the corporations themselves, making corporations accountable. We talked a little bit about Time Magazine, and then Florence really talked again about the burden of proof. Why should the burden of proof be on us and our health? The burden of proof really needs to shift back to the corporations. So that's, what else? Anyone else there want to add anything? I think that was it.
Thank you, Joan. Okay, the next one
homework assignment for everyone. Jay Feldman was wonderful as usual, and these are the things that we came up with action items. We need to engage in pesticide debate within our community. You may use pesticides in your home. You've got to look at what you use in your home and what you might be exposed to. Home pesticide includes structural pesticide like the Orkin Man, lawn and garden pests, and disinfectants that you use in your home. Then you need to come up with strategies of pesticide use in the schools where your children go to school. You can also look at roadside spraying, or Jay called it right-of-way spraying. We have a program in Iberia Parish. You can't spray during blackberry season because people were going out and picking the blackberries right after being sprayed. And the major thing is eat organic and support the organic farmers in your community. The state of Louisiana recently enacted an organic farmer certification program. These farmers will starve to death if the public does not support them. And then in New Orleans and along the Gulf Coast, we have the mosquito eradication program. And you know how it is when you go to a baseball game. Everybody likes to have the mosquito sprayed right before you go to the baseball game. Then you have to engage in the pesticide debate at the national level. You need to have victims and survivors go to Washington and tell their story. The Delaney Clause prevents cancer-causing pesticides in the food, and right now it's under attack. That's H.R. 1627, and the reg reform is SB 343. So you have to make your voices known at both the state, local, and national level.
Okay, thank you, Wilma. And is there anyone here from the radiation and breast cancer panel? With Dr. Sternglass? Dr. Sternglass.
I'm here, I'll help you on the action items.
Would you go ahead, because I didn't talk much about the action. I guess what I pointed out, and I think it's really important, that the evidence on infant mortality, on low birth weight over time, shows that indeed one can identify certain specific agents, and there's little doubt now, after Chernobyl especially, when rapid rises took place in thyroid, breast cancer, and all types of immune deficiency diseases, that indeed we greatly underestimated the effects of small amounts of radiation in the diet compared to medical x-rays. Medical x-rays for over 100 years now, exactly this year, were rather benign diagnostic to the chest, ordinary chest x-ray. We're not killing people in a large number. The breast cancer epidemic cannot be blamed on chest or dental x-rays. What we can do, however, is to educate ourselves about the evidence that the amount of radioactivity in the diet from strontium-90 in drinking water and milk and vegetable is much more efficient, perhaps 1,000 times more so per unit radiation than a chest x-ray. So we must educate ourselves that it is not the hospital waste that's going to kill us, but the nuclear industry waste. And we have to absolutely insist that since we don't know how we can store this material forever safely, we must end and phase out the generation of this extremely toxic waste. The reason we haven't been able to do it, and this addresses the question of the political and social background, and it's simply this. It was a Cold War that forced the government to secrecy in the area of radiation effects on human beings. All this has been coming out in the press in the last year or two, secret injections of plutonium and feeding pregnant women radioactive iron to learn more, and all these things went on under the auspices of the military. And that is an aspect that we must also face. It is easy to say, well, stop pollutants, but you couldn't do it, according to the government, during the time when our whole national security to them appeared to depend upon the further testing of the equivalent of 40,000 Hiroshima bombs in the atmosphere. And therefore the government was committed to actually covering up the effects on human health and trying to blame some substance or substances or lifestyles that were not connected with the bomb. And so, together with the profit motive of the investment in uranium, it is a Cold War that forced secrecy and deception in the national interest. So that's what we're up against. And now that the Cold War is over, we have a chance. And so one of the things that I believe we must all work for is to be sure that we will get an end to atomic testing and a phase out of nuclear weapons, because only when our national security is no longer dependent on nuclear energy, only then do we have a chance of not to renew the licenses of the existing plants and to end the generation of waste for which we are saddling hundreds and thousands of generations to come. Thank you.
And those action items included?
Our group really didn't get a chance to talk about the strategies, so this is hallway conversation. Although Dr. Sternglass did give a few recommendations, which started off with don't drink the milk and don't drink the water. So in terms of action strategies, if you can't afford bottled water and you don't want to, you can't find soy milk, although I did notice some people are using orange juice on their cereal in the morning, like Deborah Davis. I saw that this morning. Right, calcium reinforced. But in terms of action strategies, we need to, I think, do letter writing and phone calls to the Office of Public Health in New Orleans, to the state offices of public health. We have to demand clean water, and we have to talk about what's in that milk. We want to know. So food safety equals food security. That reference to the Delaney Clause on pesticides is very important. And if we look at Dr. Sternglass's recommendation was that everybody's got to drink water and everybody's got to breathe the air. So let's look at very simple things that everybody can relate to. And milk and water is the first step. The action campaign vis-a-vis the Times-Picayune was discussed also in the hallways in relation to two things. One was they did a story on the hearing yesterday, and the headline was, "Agencies Frustrate Cancer Activists." And then the second part of the story, the headline was, "Waiting for Action." Well, you know, those people didn't read the button, obviously. What we're talking about here is, let's take action. I don't see a bunch of disempowered people waiting for action. And so we were talking, Pat Bryant, who goes regularly to talk to these people on what the editors do to the reporters' stories and who writes the headlines and all of that. But he said it's very important for everybody, especially people here in the state who are readers, to write letters and to talk about your response to that article, and basically that we're not sitting around waiting. And those letters to the editors would be very important in sharing some of the specific information about what you've learned. And that's the second part of the strategy, not just to comment on the headlines, but as Willie had talked about earlier from Kent, Citizens Against Nuclear Trash needs all of our help, whether we're living here in Louisiana or whether we're now migrants in New York. We've all got to raise our voices that nobody's backyard can be used for this kind of trash, and that nuclear trash is one of the most disturbing menaces on the planet. And as the debate raised between the scientists, it is probably the interaction between the pesticides and these hormone mimics with the radiations that's really doing a number on everybody's body on the planet. And in terms of the nuclear testing issue, we've been receiving lots of calls for help from the women in the Pacific. Right now, you know, France is getting ready to nuke them again. They need our help. It's not your backyard right now, but we're responsible in large part for nuking those poor islands in the Pacific. And really, in terms of the planet, it's everybody's backyard. They want letters to Jacques Chirac, the president of France. Greenpeace has been very active in the campaigns. China just exploded a nuclear bomb, did a nuclear test in May. So those people who are going to China need to raise their voices
Again, not just against nuclear energy, but the continued testing and proliferation. So those were a few ideas, starting from water and milk to the letter writing campaigns and support for CANT. They also had asked for our contributions in fundraising because they do have a court case pending. And those folks, I think, really have to be commended for using the system to stop what is an industry right now that is extremely powerful. And as I think Dr. Sternglass said in the workshop, it is a betrayal of our government. When people say they can't fight City Hall, if the government is not on our sides, you know, where do you go? So Judy's testimony about fighting industry, along with challenging the government, is where we're at in the fight to really tackle this problem. And this is going to the root cause of the problem, but everybody who is working, trying to deal with the health crises in their family and their own life, also deserve, I think, our support. And so in coalition, we can really do a lot together. Thanks, folks.
And the last session was the legislative reform, and I'll give the report back from that. The interesting thing about our session was that we didn't have any experts there. Well, I take that back, because we had citizens and environmentalists, and we had Willie. So we all were experts, and we all know what we need in our communities. And we talked about how it's important that everyone take a voice and let our voices be heard in the legislative session, not just in Louisiana, but wherever you are. It's important that we do it locally, statewide, and nationally. Two of the most important that I feel are important issues that came out of our session was the school pesticide bill that passed, which set minimum standards for training and guidelines for the people that spray the schools. It also set minimum standards for the types of chemicals and pesticides that are used in the schools to be sprayed. Another important bill was the environmental self-audit privilege, which was stopped because of the lobbyists from environmentalists, citizens, and also from the legal community that stopped that. And that bill would give industry the authority to hide information about the environmental crimes from the public, and that is definitely a no-no. We don't want that to happen. So it was a hard battle. It passed through the House, and it was on its way of becoming a bill, and we stopped it in the Senate. So we do feel that are two of the biggest accomplishments that we had this session. And not only that, it's important that we continue to come up with important environmental legislation for the sessions ahead. At the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, we will be forming a legislative committee. So if anybody in the state that want to contribute and help with that, please give us a call at the center. We're housed at Xavier University, and I can give you my number and let you know what we're doing on that. Another thing I would like to say, well, the action steps that I think that is important to come out of this whole conference is that we get organized, we get the resources that we have, the local resources, the statewide resources, and the federal agencies, universities, wherever they may be, even community organizations and state organizations. We get them and we use them. We also should form coalitions and make them move in our community, use them as a vehicle to help us in our fight for the environment. We should also get action for our problems and not just talk about the problems and make these big old mountains. We need to get some action, see some action happen. We should also, in Louisiana, demand funding for DEQ out of the general budget. That's something we talked about in our session. None of the money in our general budget go to DEQ. All of their money comes from other resources due to industry. So that's a problem. We should also seek out projects in other states and use them as an example in our state, or use them so we can follow up the guidelines and see what's going on elsewhere. One of the things that was also brought out in our session was that in New Jersey, you can check off a box on your state taxes to contribute to breast cancer research. Now, it may not work that simple in our state, but I think we should look at different projects like that, and as well as educate the public, and most importantly, we should pray a lot. The bottom line is that we need to get and stay involved. The environmental community must get involved, because if we don't give our voice to our concern at the legislative session and to the legislators and politicians, then no one else will. We must be committed to developing and pursuing our own environmental agendas. Today, make a commitment to talk to your legislators about your problems, and also make a commitment to yourself as well as your community in helping in this fight against the environment. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming out. I think it's been a good day. It's been a long day, and I hope everybody has enjoyed it. And I know everybody couldn't attend all the sessions at one time, so we're going to put a transcript together, come up with all the action items, and send it out to everybody that attended. If anybody else would like to add something, I think we're going to have a speak out. Could do so now. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Hal Dean. I'd just like to mention that most of you, if not all of you, probably are well aware that the Republican Congress is hard at work and successfully at work in slashing our environmental laws to encourage and allow polluting industry to emit more pollutants with ever less regulation. The Sierra Club and some other groups are passing around a petition called the Environmental Bill of Rights. And we hope to get 1 or 2 million signatures and present this to Congress at the end of the summer. I encourage each of you to sign it. This, I feel, will be have a lot more impact than just calling or writing a single letter, even though it's just a petition and just a signature. Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole, they don't listen to one letter, but 1 million voters will give them, a hit on the side of the head. I have another petition it's called Don't Waste America. The Congress right now is about to do something that environmental activists, nuclear activists, have been trying to get reviewed for a decade or so, to review the radiation laws. And unfortunately, they're not trying to make them better, they're trying to make them even less regulatory. But this petition is about making them more stringent. And also we're trying to get 1 million or so signatures on that. So if you could all read and sign these, I'd sure appreciate it, and you probably would too. Thank you. I'm going to pass these around. I only have a couple of quick words. There's plenty of petitions on here. If you run to the end of one, turn to the next page.
All right, Sonny.
Good evening. I've sit out here and I've listened to everything everybody has said today. And I see grassroots people addressing our problems. I've attended a lot of meetings such as this, and we've had people to talk to us about us, but they've never experienced our problems. I had the pleasure of sitting here listening to different speakers talk about our problems because they shared our problems. We talk about cuts in the Republican Party, talk about all the federal agencies that's being cut. We in Louisiana have a welfare system for the chemical companies. One person that could speak directly to that is Ms. Florence Robinson. She's in front of the Board of Commerce and Industry, who give away millions of our dollars to the people that's causing the problem that we're here talking about now. And as far as the politician goes, we need to start to put some of our people in position where they can get in the back room where the deals are being cut and bring it to us before the deals are cut. If I sound like a politician, for those of you that live in Ascension Parish, and I don't think they live in District 1, but I'm going to run for the Parish Council of District 1. And believe me, they know in Ascension Parish, period, that there's not $1 that's going to be able to change my mind. So I'm not going to be one of these people that get elected, and after they get elected, and there for a month or two and find out where the big bucks are and take away all the interest that I've expressed throughout my whole career in the environmental movement for the dollar. So I work for the people that's in the movement. Thank you.